Right then, ARP2600V. I'm Matt Thomas from King Unique. We're doing this for Sonic Academy. Let's look at this front panel because, goodness, it is a big one. There's quite a lot going on there, and on a first glance, people tend to look at the 2600 and go, yeah, ooh. And well, you might. But equally, well, you might not, because it's not that complicated. Let's just cover a couple of basics. The ARP2600 is a semi-modular synthesizer. That means that unlike, say, a Mini Moog, which is wired together to always work in a certain way, the 2600 has a bunch of jack sockets that we can cable together and completely rewire how the different parts of the synth interact. However, it's semi-modular, not fully modular. And what that means is that, like the Mini Moog, it actually is kind of wired up. If I don't put any jack cables in, then it's kind of wired up so that it will always play a sound. So I can just turn it on, press the keyboard, and sound will come out. Because it has what are called normalized connections. So the VCOs are linked together to send into the VCF. The VCF is linked to go into the VCA. The envelopes affect the filters and the volume, etc., just like on a bog standard mono synth. So what we have is the best of both worlds. We have a synth that you can just turn on and use straight out the box, and it's wired together in a straightforward, predictable fashion. However, if I want to do something unstraightforward and unpredictable, if I want to take VCO3's triangle oscillator to modulate the filter cutoff of the VCF, I just drag a cable from one to the other. If I want the noise source to modulate the audio volume, I can do that too. So there's a bunch of things we can do that will create all kinds of unusual sounds that would be very, very hard to achieve on a standard hardwired mono synth. So that's the first thing to get your head around. I guess that brings us to the issue of jack cables. So to do these more complicated connections, we simply draw a jack cable. If I click into a jack socket, out comes a cable, and I can drop it into any destination or source that makes sense for that particular connection. However, I can't attach them to destinations that don't make sense. So you may find with some of these wires, you pull from one to another, and it just doesn't go anywhere because they are not compatible. I can't send an output to an output, for example. When I want to take a cable out, I simply drag and out it comes. Alternatively, I can also right-click and up comes a remove connection option. As well as pulling the cables, like this, I've gone from VCO2's sine wave to the sample and hold out. What I can also do is right-click on a source, and a menu comes up, and I can go to oscillator 2, FM4, there it is. Or I go to oscillator 2, frequency modulation 2, socket 1, 2, 3, 4, you see. So I can see a list of possible destinations, and it changes for every single one of the sockets. That will save me trying to connect to things I can't connect to. Additionally, I get to see a reminder of what this socket is. It's oscillator 2 sine, for example. Here, if I click on this one, I'll see that it is audio 1, so it's the first fader feeding into the audio mixer. So this is how we do the internal wiring if we don't want to use the hardwired connection. So how do we know what's hardwired? Well, all these orange labels here, pointing up, see the tiny arrow pointing up into the jack socket? What these orange labels are telling us is what is normalized. What is going to happen if we don't put a jack socket in, then the keyboard CV will go straight through that socket and up into this fader. And I can control the depth of the keyboard CV. What this means we'll cover later. Similar here, I can send the ADSR envelope, appears at this fader. And if I want to increase the ADSR effect on something, I just push up that fader. So these faders are the depth of any connection. And these labels down here are the connection that is made if we don't put a jack socket in to break it. So right now, if I leave this synth alone and just push this fader up, the envelope will affect the pitch of VCO1. If, however, I bring the output of the LFO, I've now replaced that ADSR connection, and it's now the depth of the LFO on VCO1. So that's what semi-normalized means. It means these connections here, which are labeled, are what will happen unless we supersede them with a jack socket being placed in, connected to another source. We'll come back to this later, but the gate and the trig here are slightly mislabeled. These two are actually output. Every other one of these is an input jack where I can place a signal in to then create that depth. These two are a place you can pull the gate and the trig, which are created by you tapping keys on the keyboard. You can pull the gate and the trig and send them elsewhere. So these two Slightly mislabeled, really. They shouldn't have the same terminology, but there we go. These are outputs. Everything else is an input. Okay, so these are places you can send signals to and then increase their depth effect upon, in this case, the filter or an oscillator or the VCA, etc. So that's the basic terminology and use of the ARP2600. So let's take a look through the modules and see what's on this machine. This section here, which I'm mousing over currently, this is full of modules that should be very familiar to anybody who's used an analog monosynth. You've got 1, 2, 3 oscillators. They're broadly the same, and they feed into a filter. The filter sums these sounds and can either remove tones from the bottom, the top, the middle, etc., because we've got a low pass, a high pass, a band pass, and a notch. The filter is then sent to the VCA, where we can control the way the volume of the sound changes over time, and we can do that with these envelopes here, which can be sent obviously into the filter, to the VCA, etc. So this area is very familiar analog monosynth gear. From here, we'll expand out into the more unusual stuff. Over here, we have a mixer with a reverb tank. This lets us simply mix a few different signals together, mix them into reverb, and send them out left to right and do some panning. Nice and straightforward. Over on this side, we have a preamp, which lets us bring sound into the 2600 and boost it. Then we can send it out anywhere else we want into the synth. An envelope follower, which can track the volume of a signal passing through it and produce a modulation based on that volume. If you were to send the input signal of, say, a drum beat through to here, because the preamp is hardwired, then you'll get the volume signature of that drum beat as a modulation you can send into the 2600. Here's a ring mod circuit. We send in 2 audio signals. They're combined to create what's called the sum and difference, where the 2 frequencies are added together and then they're subtracted from each other to create these quite unusual atonal clangorous tones. Down here, we have a noise generator, simple white noise, pink noise. You can control whether it's bright or dark noise, and you send that out into the synth. Here are voltage processors. This is a section that allows us to combine more than one voltage. So, for example, if we wanted to have an envelope and an LFO combined, so that we can send an LFO that increases with the movement of an envelope out as a modulation source, we can do that here. We've got 4 of those, and they can be linked together if needed. Next, we have a sample and hold, which is often seen as a random pitch generator, but it's not quite that. Sample and hold is a circuit that takes regular grabs at any signal that's being passed through it and holds the level it's found until the next grab, the next grab, the next grab. If you send noise into it, you get the classic sample and hold burble. If you send in an LFO, then instead of getting a sweeping, you'll get. So it's a way of breaking flowing signals into steps effectively. So we've got a sample and hold. We also have an unusual module called an electro switch, which allows us to switch between 2 input signals at a regular time set by the clock, actually, of the sample and hold here. So, for example, you might send in 2 audio signals, and it will switch between a sawtooth, a zzz, and a triangle woo, and you get zzz, oo, zzz, oo, zzz, oo, as this thing switches rhythmically, and you can send that output anywhere into the synth. These 2 speaker grills, these on the original 2600 were speakers, so that you could play the synth without any additional amplification. We obviously don't need those on a laptop screen, so we can press these little buttons, and we find that Arturia have added some more functions. Over here we have a chorus circuit and a delay circuit, so we've got some effects. And over here we have a tracking generator, which is a place that allows us to draw unusual curves, shapes, even noise sections. And then once we've got these, we can then feed them as modulation sources into the 2600. Quite a nice thing. You can run 4 at once. Rolling on down, we have the sequencer model 1601. Not actually part of the ARP2600 originally, but a common add-on. This is a 16-step analog sequencer. It has what are called 3 gate buses, so we can send out 3 separate chains of gates, as well as a single 16-step chain of voltages. This whole section is just about the sequencer. There's quite a lot of functionality. We'll come and look at it properly when we get to this piece. But you're going to need to get your head around this. I really think that the 2600V, as Arturia put it together, really benefits from getting your head right around this sequencer. You obviously can just play with the 2600 section and never look at it once. But it's really nice. It's so well integrated to the 2600 that getting your head around this is well worth your time. Over here we have a standalone LFO. The oscillators can actually be switched into a low frequency mode here, LF, so they can work as LFOs. But in case you're using all 3 in the audio range, as sound sources, we have a single standalone LFO here. On the left, we have some global controls for things like pitch and whether we're working in mono or poly mode. whether notes re-trigger, all this sort of thing. Just housekeeping, but you need it. And down here we have a way of routing things like velocity and aftertouch and pitch bend into the semi-modular aspect of the 2600, so they can do things other than just change volume. They can do all manner of strangeness by routing them into any of these destination sockets. Last of all, a keyboard, and that is the ARP2600V. I've shot through it at breakneck speed there. You might be kind of going, "Oh, yes, steady on, Matt." It's fine because we've got like another 18 lessons, so we can steady on. Get yourself a cup of tea. Let's do this, and I will see you shortly.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.